While I was at work, my parents cleared out my kids' rooms and shoved all their things into the basement, insisting, "Your nephew deserves the best rooms in the house." When I walked in to find my children in tears, I simply smiled and said, "Go pack your bags." They had no idea the storm they just unleashed. I opened the front door expecting to find my children asleep in their beds after my 18-hour shift. Instead, Lucas sat on the living room couch in his pajamas, tears streaming down his face as he held a trash bag full of his belongings. "They said we don't deserve nice rooms anymore, Mom. They said your nephew is more important than us." The words cut through my exhaustion like a scalpel through skin. Maya emerged from the hallway, dragging her violin case and a pillowcase stuffed with clothes. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was something else there: anger. At 8 years old, my daughter had learned what injustice felt like, and I could see it burning in her expression. "Where are your things supposed to go?" I asked, though dread was already pooling in my stomach. "The basement," Lucas whispered. "Grandpa showed us where they put our beds. It smells funny down there and there are spiders." I knelt in front of my son, still wearing my hospital scrubs that reeked of antiseptic and other people's emergencies. For 18 hours I had saved lives, comforted families, and held everything together with professional competence. Now, in my childhood living room, I felt completely powerless. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Maya set down her violin case with careful precision. "Uncle Ryan and Aunt Natalie came over after dinner. They had baby Oliver with them and he was crying a lot. Grandma said he needed a quiet room for his naps, and Aunt Natalie said she needed somewhere to work on her computer for her important job." Lucas nodded vigorously. "Then Grandpa said the basement was perfectly good for kids our age, and that we should be grateful we have somewhere to sleep at all. When I asked about my asthma and the dust down there, he said I was being dramatic." Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these real-life family stories. If you believe children deserve equal love and respect, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more families facing similar challenges. Now let's see how this story unfolds. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. These were the same people who had offered us shelter 18 months ago when my marriage to Marcus imploded. The same people who had watched me work myself to exhaustion, contributing every penny I could while rebuilding my life from scratch. "Where are Grandma and Grandpa now?" I asked. "In the kitchen with Uncle Ryan and Aunt Natalie," Maya replied. "They're talking about how to make baby Oliver's room perfect. Grandma said she wants to buy him one of those expensive swinging chairs that cost as much as a car payment." I stood slowly, my nurse's training kicking in as I assessed the situation like a medical emergency. 2 children in emotional distress. Family dynamics reaching a critical point. Immediate intervention required. The voices from the kitchen drifted down the hallway: Dorothy's excited planning, Frank's agreeable murmurs, Ryan's entitled demands, and Natalie's particular requirements for her workspace. They were discussing paint colors for the nursery while my children sat in the living room with their belongings in garbage bags. "Mom," Lucas tugged at my scrub top. "Are we really not family like baby Oliver?" The question shattered something inside me. Not the dramatic kind of breaking that happens in movies, but the quiet, definitive snap of a bone under too much pressure. I looked at my son, brilliant, sensitive Lucas, who read at a 5th grade level and worried about endangered animals. Then at Maya, fierce, talented Maya, who had just one first-chair violin in her school orchestra despite everything we'd been through. "You are absolutely family," I said firmly. "And don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But even as I said it, I could see the truth we'd all been avoiding. We weren't family here, we were charity cases. Temporary residents whose presence was tolerated as long as we remained grateful, quiet, and invisible. I thought back to the day we'd first arrived, when Dorothy had made such a show of clearing out the guest rooms for us. How she'd emphasized repeatedly that this was just until you get back on your feet. How every contribution I made to the household was met with a reminder that they were helping me out during a difficult time. The laughter from the kitchen grew louder. Someone, probably Natalie, made a joke about finally having the space we need. More laughter followed. "Get your most important things," I told the twins quietly. "Just what you need for tonight." "Are we leaving?" Maya asked, and I heard hope threading through her exhaustion. "Not tonight," I said, though my mind was already calculating possibilities. "But soon. I promise you that." I helped them gather essentials, school clothes for tomorrow, toothbrushes, the stuffed animals they still needed for comfort. As we worked, I made mental notes. Our lease agreement was month to month. My savings account had been growing steadily from overtime shifts, though I'd been telling myself it was just emergency money. Maybe it was time to admit this qualified as an emergency. The basement door stood open and I could smell the musty dampness wafting up. 2 mattresses had been thrown directly onto the concrete floor. No bed frames, no attempt at making the space livable. Just the bare minimum required to technically provide shelter. "I won't sleep down there," Maya said with quiet determination. "It's not safe for Lucas's breathing and it's not fair." My 8-year-old daughter had more backbone than the adults in this house. The realization filled me with both pride and heartbreak. "You won't have to," I promised. "Tonight you'll both sleep in my room like we're having a sleepover. Tomorrow we'll figure out something better." As I tucked them into my childhood bed, Maya asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mom, why do they love baby Oliver more than us?" I smoothed her hair, searching for words that would be honest without destroying her faith in family entirely. "Sometimes adults make decisions based on fear rather than love. Grandma and Grandpa are afraid of disappointing Uncle Ryan, so they're prioritizing his family's wants over everyone else's needs." "But that's not fair," Lucas whispered. "No, it's not fair. And that's why we won't accept it." After they fell asleep, I sat in the quiet darkness and opened my banking app on my phone. The savings account showed $3,847. Not enough for first month's rent and security deposit in most places, but getting closer. I scrolled through rental listings, calculating possibilities. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened a new browser tab and started researching my rights as a tenant, even in a family home. What I found was enlightening. Even living with relatives, I had certain protections. They couldn't just move my belongings or change my living arrangements without proper notice. More importantly, I had options. I pulled up rental websites and started saving listings. 1-bedroom apartments that we could manage with my salary. 2-bedroom places that would require careful budgeting but were possible. 3-bedroom houses that seemed impossible now but wouldn't be forever. For the first time since Marcus had asked for the divorce, I felt something other than fear about our future. Lying there in my childhood room with my children breathing softly beside me, I started planning our real escape. Not just from this house, but from the mindset that had kept me accepting scraps when we deserved so much more. The house settled around us with familiar creaks. Down the hall, Dorothy's television provided background noise to what I now recognized as the last night we would spend as grateful, silent guests. Tomorrow things would change. Maybe not dramatically, maybe not immediately, but definitively. I closed my eyes and made a promise to the darkness and to my sleeping children. We would not beg for basic respect. We would not raise another generation to accept emotional crumbs. And we absolutely would not let anyone convince us we were less deserving of love and consideration than a baby who didn't even live here. The foundation of our temporary arrangement had always been fragile. Tonight it had finally cracked beyond repair. But sometimes I realized, you had to let the broken things fall apart completely before you could build something stronger in their place. The morning brought an illusion of normalcy that lasted exactly until my phone rang during my coffee. Ryan's voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard since his college graduation. "Isabella, we have incredible news. Natalie and I are expecting." Before I could even process the announcement properly, he was already launching into logistics. "We want to tell Mom and Dad in person tonight. Can you make sure the kids are on their best behavior? This is really important to us." I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, still processing. Another grandchild. Competition for attention that Maya and Lucas were already losing. "Congratulations, Ryan. That's wonderful news." "Thanks. Oh, and make something special for dinner, will you? Natalie's been having morning sickness, so maybe that chicken dish Mom always loved? You know how to make it better than anyone." The casual assumption that I'd handle the celebration dinner for his announcement rankled, but I agreed. Maya and Lucas were still asleep, and I had a few hours before my afternoon shift to prepare what would apparently become a coronation feast. When Ryan and Natalie arrived that evening, they carried themselves with the gravity of visiting dignitaries. Natalie wore a flowing dress that emphasized her barely visible pregnancy, while Ryan's chest puffed with pride as they gathered us in the living room for their special announcement. Dorothy's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Tears sprang to her eyes as she pressed both hands to her heart. "Oh my goodness! Frank, did you hear that? We're going to have another grandchild." The emphasis on another stung as if Maya and Lucas were somehow practice rounds for the real thing. Frank beamed, immediately launching into stories about Ryan's own baby days, while Dorothy began rapid-fire planning for nursery preparations, baby showers and photography sessions. "We'll need to get the house ready for visits," Dorothy declared, her mind already racing ahead. "The library would make a perfect nursery. All those books can be moved to the garage." Maya looked up from her homework. "But Grandma, don't they live in their own house?" "Well, yes, dear, but when they visit with the baby, we'll need proper accommodations. Babies require so much equipment." Lucas frowned. "What kind of equipment?" Natalie laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both musical and condescending. "Oh, you'll see, Lucas. Babies need cribs, changing tables, special chairs, monitors, warmers, so many things you probably don't remember needing." The conversation continued around my children as if they were observers rather than participants. Ryan discussed his plans to take paternity leave, Natalie outlined her birthing preferences, and my parents hung on every word. When Maya tried to share that she'd been selected for advanced violin lessons, Dorothy waved her quiet. "Not now, sweetheart. We're discussing important family news." The transformation of the library began the very next weekend. Professional contractors arrived to remove built-in bookshelves that had held Frank's collection for 30 years. Dorothy supervised with the intensity of a general commanding troops, directing the placement of custom-ordered nursery furniture that cost more than my monthly contribution to the household. "Isn't this exciting?" Dorothy asked as painters applied the first coat of pale yellow to the walls. "Our grandson will have the most beautiful room." Maya stood in the doorway, watching strangers dismantle what had been her favorite reading space. "Where will all the books go?" "Storage," Frank replied dismissively. "Books can go anywhere. But a nursery needs to be perfect." The irony wasn't lost on me that Maya and Lucas had been sleeping on twin beds pushed together in the converted den for over a year, while my parents were creating a palace for a baby who would visit occasionally. When I mentioned this to Dorothy privately, she looked at me as if I'd spoken in another language. "That's completely different, Isabella. Maya and Lucas are big kids who can adapt. Babies have very specific needs." The nursery project consumed the next month. Dorothy documented every stage on social media, posting photos of paint swatches, furniture assembly and decoration placement. Her captions gushed about preparing for our precious grandson and creating the perfect space for baby Oliver. Meanwhile, Maya's request for a small desk in their shared space was deemed unnecessary clutter, and Lucas's suggestion of hanging his science project certificates was met with concerns about keeping the walls clean. When baby Oliver finally arrived, the household dynamic shifted so dramatically it felt like living in a completely different home. Dorothy canceled her weekly volunteer commitments to be available for visits. Frank rearranged his workshop schedule around potential babysitting duties. The refrigerator, once covered with Maya and Lucas's artwork and achievement certificates, was cleared to make room for professional newborn photos. The first time Ryan and Natalie brought Oliver for an extended visit, I watched my parents transform into entirely different people. Dorothy spoke in hushed, reverent tones about every sound the baby made. Frank, who had always been practical about children's needs, suddenly became an expert on infant development, analyzing Oliver's every movement for signs of advanced intelligence. "Look how alert he is," Dorothy whispered as Oliver stared blankly at the ceiling. Ryan was exactly the same way, so aware of his surroundings. Maya attempted to show her grandmother a poem she'd written for school. "Grandma, my teacher said this was really good and wants to submit it to a contest." "That's nice, dear," Dorothy replied without looking away from Oliver. "Maybe later. I need to watch for his feeding cues." The baby wasn't even hungry. He was simply existing in the way all babies do, but to Dorothy and Frank, every breath was a miracle worth documenting and celebrating. Christmas that year became a study in contrasts that would have been comical if it weren't so painful. The living room overflowed with gifts for Oliver, a luxury stroller that cost more than most people's rent, designer clothes he'd outgrow in weeks, educational toys for a child who couldn't even focus his eyes properly yet. Maya unwrapped her modest collection of books and art supplies with grace that broke my heart. Lucas smiled genuinely at his new science kit, though I saw him glance toward the mountain of gifts surrounding Oliver's carrier. "Why does baby Oliver get so many presents?" Lucas asked quietly as we cleaned up wrapping paper later. Dorothy overheard and knelt beside him with a patronizing smile. "Well, honey, babies need so many things to grow up healthy and strong. You and Maya already have everything you need." The message was clear. Maya and Lucas were complete, finished products requiring minimal investment. Oliver was a precious project deserving unlimited resources and attention. The breaking point came during Maya's violin recital 3 months later. She had worked for weeks to perfect her solo piece, and the school had selected her to represent her grade at the district competition. I arranged my schedule specifically to attend, excited to watch my daughter's moment of triumph. Dorothy had promised to come. Maya had practiced extra hard, knowing her grandmother would be watching. But an hour before the recital, Dorothy called to cancel. "I'm so sorry, dear, but Ryan needs me to watch Oliver while they go to a doctor's appointment. You understand how important the baby's health is." I understood perfectly. My daughter's achievement ranked below babysitting duty for her uncle's family. I sat alone in that auditorium, watching Maya's face scan the audience for her grandmother's proud smile that would never come. After the recital, Maya climbed into our car with her first place ribbon and asked the question that shattered my remaining illusions about our living situation. "Mom, does Grandma love baby Oliver more than us because we're not really her family?" In that moment, sitting in the school parking lot with my talented, perceptive daughter, I realized we had been reduced to temporary residence in a home that prioritized biology over relationship, potential over achievement, and someday over right now. The golden grandson had arrived, and Maya and Lucas had become invisible in the shadow of his anticipated greatness. That conversation in the car after Maya's recital was still echoing in my mind when Ryan called 3 weeks later. His voice carried a stress I'd rarely heard from my usually confident brother. "Isabel, we have a situation. The contractors found serious foundation issues at our place. We're going to need somewhere to stay while they fix it." I gripped the phone tighter, watching Maya and Lucas play in our cramped den space. "How long are we talking about?" "Maybe 6 to 8 weeks. I know it's not ideal, but Mom and Dad have plenty of room, and with Oliver being so little, we really need the help." The audacity of the statement stunned me. Plenty of room. We were already living 3 people to what had originally been a home office, while Oliver's nursery sat pristine and largely unused. "Ryan, the house is already pretty full with us here. Come on, sis. Family helps family, right? Besides, Mom's been wanting more time with Oliver anyway." Before I could respond further, I heard Dorothy's voice in the background, clearly having been listening to the entire conversation. "Of course they'll stay here. We'll make it work." The decision had been made without consulting me, despite the fact that my children and I would bear the brunt of the overcrowding. When I tried to call Dorothy directly to discuss logistics, she brushed off my concerns with practiced ease. "Isabella dear, this is what families do. Ryan and Natalie are in crisis, and we have an obligation to help them through it. What about Maya and Lucas's needs? Where exactly is everyone supposed to sleep? We'll figure it out. Perhaps the children could share one room more efficiently." The moving day arrived with all the ceremony of a royal relocation. Frank appeared at 7 in the morning with a borrowed truck, ready to help transfer Ryan and Natalie's belongings. I watched from the kitchen window as he carefully wrapped their furniture in moving blankets, the same man who had shrugged when my dresser got scratched during our move 18 months earlier. Dorothy fluttered around the house, rearranging closets and clearing storage space for Natalie's extensive wardrobe. The front hall closet, where I'd been keeping our winter coats and emergency supplies, was emptied entirely to accommodate their belongings. "Where should I put our things?" I asked, holding an armload of displaced items. "Oh, just find somewhere temporary," Dorothy replied, too focused on creating hanging space for Natalie's professional wardrobe to give the question proper attention. Ryan and Natalie arrived with enough luggage for a months-long vacation. Suitcases, diaper bags, a portable crib, high chair, bouncy seat, play mat, and countless other baby accessories that immediately claimed every available surface in the common areas. "This is so generous of you, Dorothy," Natalie gushed as Frank carried her designer luggage to the master guest suite. "We really appreciate having a proper space during this stressful time." Maya appeared at my elbow whispering, "Mom, where are all their things going to go?" I was wondering the same thing. Within hours, Our already cramped living situation had become genuinely chaotic. Oliver's equipment dominated the living room, creating obstacle courses around furniture. The kitchen counters disappeared under bottles, sterilizers, and specialized baby food makers. The house rules shifted immediately and dramatically. Dorothy posted a handwritten schedule on the refrigerator outlining Oliver's nap times, feeding schedule, and quiet periods that seemed to encompass most of the day. "Maya, sweetheart," Dorothy said as my daughter attempted her usual after-school violin practice, "baby Oliver is sleeping right now. Perhaps you could practice later." "But this is when my teacher said to practice," Maya replied, confusion clear in her voice. "Well, we need to be flexible now that we have a little one in the house." I watched my daughter carefully pack away her violin, the same instrument Dorothy had once praised as beautiful music that fills the house with joy. Now it was noise that interfered with the golden grandson's rest. Lucas faced his own adjustments. His habit of reading aloud during homework was banned as too disruptive. His collection of science books, previously scattered around the den for easy access, had to be contained in one small box to make room for Oliver's toys. "But I can't find my astronomy book," Lucas complained quietly to me one evening. "It's probably in the storage box under your bed," I suggested, though I felt the unfairness of the situation acutely. A baby who couldn't even sit up yet somehow required more space than two school-age children. The dining room transformation was perhaps the most telling change. Natalie announced she needed a proper workspace for her consulting business, claiming the kitchen table was too chaotic for professional video calls. Within days, my parents had converted the formal dining room into a makeshift office, complete with professional lighting and a backdrop for meetings. "Where are Maya and Lucas supposed to do their art projects now?" I asked Dorothy, gesturing to the table where my children had spread out school assignments for over a year. "They can work in their room, can't they? Or the kitchen table when Natalie isn't using it." The kitchen table that was perpetually covered with Oliver's feeding supplies, sterilization equipment, and Natalie's breast pump accessories. The room that had shrunk to accommodate twin beds with barely walking space between them. "Mom," I said carefully, "the kids need space to spread out their homework too. Maya's science fair project requires a lot of materials." "Well, perhaps she could choose a smaller project this year," Dorothy suggested, as if my daughter's educational opportunities should be adjusted to accommodate house guests. The evening that everything crystallized was a Tuesday in late September. Maya had been practicing violin in the converted den our room, with the door closed to muffle the sound. She was preparing for an important audition that could earn her a scholarship for advanced lessons. Natalie burst through our door without knocking, baby Oliver fussing in her arms. "Maya, you absolutely have to stop that noise. Oliver is trying to sleep, and I have a client call in 10 minutes that could be worth thousands of dollars to our family." Maya lowered her violin, her face flushing with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Aunt Natalie. I was trying to be quiet." "Well, it's not working. Some things are more important than hobby practice." I felt something snap inside me as I watched my talented daughter being dismissed so casually. Maya is preparing for an audition that could provide her with advanced music education. This isn't a hobby, it's her passion and potential future. Natalie's expression shifted to barely concealed irritation. "Isabella, I understand you want to support Maya, but we need to be realistic about priorities. Oliver's sleep schedule affects his development, and my work supports this entire family's financial stability." The implication was clear. My daughter's musical education was a luxury that interfered with more important family needs. My children's growth and opportunities were secondary to Oliver's nap schedule and Natalie's business calls. That night, as I tucked Maya and Lucas into their cramped beds, Maya asked the question that had been building for weeks. "Mom, why do we have to give up everything for baby Oliver? We were here first." I sat on the edge of her bed, searching for an explanation that wouldn't destroy her faith in fairness entirely. Sometimes adults make decisions based on who they think needs help the most, rather than what's actually fair. "But we need help too," Lucas observed quietly. "We need space for homework and practicing and just being kids." He was absolutely right. We did need help, support, and consideration. Instead, we were being systematically erased from our own temporary home to make room for house guests who were being treated like honored royalty. As I listened to Oliver's cries echoing through the house at 2 in the morning, followed by Natalie's demands for different room temperature and Dorothy's immediate compliance, I realized we weren't living with family anymore. We were living with strangers who happened to share our DNA, and those strangers had made it abundantly clear where our place was in their hierarchy of importance. The unwelcome houseguests had arrived, and they were rewriting the rules of our existence one day at a time. The morning I left for what would become a 28-hour marathon at the hospital, I made sure to leave detailed instructions on the kitchen counter. Maya's violin practice schedule, Lucas's reading time, bedtime routines, and a reminder about their weekend plans. I even wrote a note asking Dorothy to include them in family conversations during dinner, since they'd been growing quieter each day. Make sure they feel special today, I'd written at the bottom. They've been having a hard time adjusting to all the changes. The emergency department was understaffed that weekend, with 3 nurses calling in sick and a multi-car accident that kept us running non-stop. By hour 20, my feet ached and my back screamed, but the overtime pay would go straight into my secret savings account. Every exhausting hour was another step toward independence. During my brief break around midnight, I texted Maya, "Hope you had a good day with Grandma and Grandpa. Love you both. See you tomorrow afternoon." Her response came quickly, "Love you too, Mom. Can't wait for you to come home." Something in those words felt urgent, but exhaustion clouded my judgment. I assumed she simply missed me after the long shift. The drive home Sunday evening should have prepared me for what I'd find. Even from the driveway, the house felt different. No lights in the den where Maya and Lucas usually read before bed. No violin music drifting from the windows. Just an unusual quiet that made my stomach tighten. I found them exactly as I described earlier. Lucas in his pajamas holding a trash bag of belongings, Maya clutching her violin case with tears streaming down her face. But what I hadn't mentioned was what happened next, after they explained about the basement and their banishment from the upstairs rooms. "When did this happen?" I asked, kneeling between them. "Right after lunch," Maya whispered. "Uncle Ryan said Oliver needed more space to crawl around, and Aunt Natalie said she needed a bigger office because her business was growing." Lucas nodded, his voice shaking. "Grandpa said the basement was an adventure, like camping indoors. But Mom, there are bugs down there and it smells funny and the walls are wet in some places." I felt my professional composure cracking. These were the same children I'd specifically asked to be included and cherished while I worked to support our family. Instead, they'd been literally relegated to the basement to make room for a 9-month-old who couldn't even crawl yet and his mother's expanding business empire. "Show me," I said quietly. The basement stairs creaked under our weight as we descended into what could only be described as a dungeon. The single bare bulb cast harsh shadows across concrete walls. 2 mattresses lay directly on the floor, surrounded by hastily dumped belongings. Maya's carefully organized art supplies were scattered in cardboard boxes. Lucas's beloved book collection was stacked against a wall that showed clear water damage. The smell hit me, then musty dampness mixed with something else. In the far corner, dark spots climbed the foundation wall like a disease spreading through the concrete. "Lucas," I said, my voice carefully controlled, "you cannot sleep down here with your asthma." "I told them that," he replied, his 8-year-old voice heavy with defeat. "Grandpa said I was being dramatic and that fresh air would be good for me anyway." Fresh air. In a basement with one window that barely cracked open and visible mold contamination. I climbed the stairs with my children behind me, my nurses training cataloging safety violations and health hazards with each step. The kitchen glowed with warm light, laughter spilling from the adjacent living room where my family was enjoying their Sunday evening in comfort. They looked up as we entered, Dorothy at the kitchen table organizing Oliver's feeding schedule, Frank reading his newspaper, Ryan bouncing Oliver on his knee while Natalie scrolled through her phone. "Isabella," Dorothy exclaimed with manufactured cheer. "How was your shift? We've had such a lovely weekend with the children." "Lovely," I repeated, looking at my tear-stained kids. "I saw their new accommodations downstairs." Frank folded his newspaper with deliberate precision. "We thought they'd enjoy having their own space. Kids love adventures." Adventures. The word tasted bitter. "You moved my children to an unfinished basement with mold exposure and inadequate ventilation." Ryan looked up from Oliver, his expression shifting to mild annoyance. "Come on, Isabella. You're being dramatic. It's perfectly fine down there. We made sure they had everything they needed." "Everything they needed?" I gestured toward Lucas. He has asthma. That environment could trigger a serious attack. Natalie finally looked up from her phone. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. I grew up sharing a room with 3 sisters. A little character building never hurt anyone. The casual dismissal of my children's well-being, delivered while she sat in the comfort of the converted dining room office, crystallized everything wrong with our situation. Where exactly did you grow up sharing that room? I asked quietly. He blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? You grew up in a 5-bedroom house in Westfield. I've seen the photos on your social media. Which 3 sisters were you sharing with in that mansion? A flush crept up her neck as Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Well, that's not really the point. It's exactly the point. I turned to Dorothy. You spent $3,000 creating a nursery for a baby who visits twice a week, but you think the basement is appropriate for the children who live here every day. Dorothy's face hardened. Now you listen here, Isabella. We've been more than generous letting you stay here, and we won't be spoken to like this in our own home. Your nephew deserves the best rooms in the house, she continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation. Oliver is family and family comes first. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Maya made a small sound beside me, and I saw Lucas's face crumple with understanding. Oliver is family, I repeated slowly. And what exactly are Maya and Lucas? Frank stood, his newspaper forgotten. Tao, that's enough. You're being completely unreasonable. The basement is perfectly suitable for children their age. They should be grateful they have somewhere to sleep at all. Grateful. I looked at each of them in turn. Dorothy with her self-righteous anger, Frank with his dismissive authority, Ryan with his entitled smirk, Natalie with her casual cruelty. My children should be grateful for a moldy basement while you create a palace for their cousin. Ryan's smirk widened. Where exactly do you think you're going to go, Isabella? It's not like you have a lot of options here. That smirk. That casual assumption of my helplessness. That absolute certainty that I was trapped and dependent and would accept whatever scraps they offered. I felt something settle over me then, not anger, not hurt, but a crystalline clarity that cut through months of self-doubt and accommodation. Pack your bags, I told Maya and Lucas quietly. The smirk vanished from Ryan's face. What? You heard me. I looked at my children, seeing hope flicker in their eyes for the first time in weeks. Pack what you need for tonight. We're leaving. You can't be serious, Dorothy sputtered. Where on earth do you think you're going? I smiled then, feeling power I hadn't known I possessed. Somewhere my children are valued. Somewhere they don't have to be grateful for basement scraps while other children get palace treatment. The stunned silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in months. The stunned silence stretched for exactly 3 heartbeats before chaos erupted. Ryan shot to his feet, nearly dropping Oliver in the process. Isabella, you're being ridiculous. You can't just leave because you didn't get your way. Pie way. I kept my voice level, though adrenaline coursed through my veins. My way would have been my children being treated with basic respect and dignity. Apparently that was too much to ask. Maya and Lucas stood frozen beside me, uncertain whether to move. I placed a gentle hand on each of their shoulders. Go pack your most important things. Just what you need for a few days. Wait. Dorothy jumped up, her face flushed with panic. Let's not be hasty here. We can discuss this like adults. Maybe we were a bit thoughtless about the room arrangements. A bit thoughtless? I almost laughed at the understatement. You moved my children to a moldy basement without my knowledge or consent while I was working to support this family. Frank stepped forward, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood. Now see here, Isabella. You're not thinking clearly. Where exactly do you plan to go? You can't afford your own place, and you certainly can't drag those children around from hotel to hotel. There was the assumption that had underlied every interaction for the past 18 months. The belief that I was financially helpless, professionally inadequate, and completely dependent on their charity. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen toward them. I've been saving every extra shift, every overtime hour, every penny I could squeeze from our budget. I have enough for first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposit. The color drained from Ryan's face. You've been planning this? I've been preparing for independence, I corrected. Something I should have done months ago. Natalie finally spoke up, her voice sharp with accusation. So this whole time you've been living here under false pretenses, pretending to be grateful while secretly plotting to leave? I've been living here while contributing financially and practically to this household, I replied evenly. The only false pretense was believing my children would be treated as valued family members rather than inconvenient house guests. Dorothy's tears started, then dramatic, desperate sobs designed to manipulate. Isabella, please. We're family. Families work through their problems together. We can fix this. Can we? I challenged. Can you explain to Maya why her violin practice suddenly became noise pollution when it used to be beautiful music? Can you tell Lucas why his respiratory health is less important than Oliver's nap time? We never said, Frank began. You didn't have to say it. Your actions spoke clearly enough. I gestured toward the pristine living room where Oliver's equipment dominated every surface. When was the last time you displayed Maya's artwork on the refrigerator? When did you last attend one of Lucas's school events? The silence was answer enough. Maya and Lucas returned with their hastily packed belongings, moving with a quiet efficiency that broke my heart. Maya carried her violin case and a small bag containing her most treasured possessions. Lucas clutched his stuffed elephant and a backpack full of his favorite books. Where are we going, Mom? Maya asked quietly. Before I could answer, Ryan's voice cut across the room with cruel certainty. Nowhere. She's bluffing. Isabella doesn't have anywhere to go. I met his smug gaze directly. Actually, I signed a lease on a 3-bedroom house last week. The keys are in my purse and the utilities are already connected. The transformation in their expressions was remarkable. Smugness shifted to shock, then disbelief, then desperate calculation. A 3-bedroom house? Dorothy's voice cracked. How on earth can you afford that? By working extra shifts while you provided childcare, by saving every possible penny, and by maintaining excellent credit despite a difficult divorce. I picked up Maya's violin case. Ironically, your help with the children enabled me to work enough overtime to afford our escape. Frank's face turned an alarming shade of red. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Sneaking around behind our backs. I repaid you every day, I replied calmly. $800 monthly, cooking most meals, cleaning, and ensuring my children respected your rules. What I didn't realize was that respect only flowed one direction in this family. Ryan made one last attempt at control. You're making a huge mistake, Isabella. That house will eat up your entire salary. You'll be back here within 3 months begging for help. Maybe, I acknowledged. But at least my children will have their own rooms with windows that open and walls without mold. They'll have space to practice their instruments and do their homework without being told they're inconvenient. Natalie's voice turned venomous. Fine. Leave then. But don't expect us to come running when this little rebellion fails. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had casually dismissed my daughter's education as a hobby and relegated my son to a basement that could trigger his asthma. Natalie, I said quietly, some bridges need to burn. The foundation was rotten anyway. Dorothy made one final desperate plea. Isabella, please. Think about what you're teaching the children. That when things get difficult you just run away. I knelt down so I was eye level with Maya and Lucas. What am I teaching you both right now? Maya considered the question seriously. That we're worth fighting for? That we don't have to accept being treated badly just because people say they love us? Lucas added. That families should make each other feel safe and valued, Maya continued, understanding dawning in her voice. I stood, pride swelling in my chest. Exactly. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve. The drive to Patricia's house was quiet but not tense. Maya and Lucas sat in the back seat, processing the enormity of what had just happened. I called Patricia from the driveway, explaining our situation briefly. Come on up, she said immediately. I've got the guest room ready and some leftover lasagna that needs eating. Patricia met us at her door with warm hugs and no questions beyond, are you all okay? She'd prepared her guest room with fresh linens, set out towels, and even had a selection of movies ready for the kids. I can't thank you enough, I began, but she waved me off. You do the same for me, she said simply. Now who wants hot chocolate while we figure out our next steps? Sitting in Patricia's cozy kitchen watching Maya and Lucas finally relax for the first time in months, I felt the weight of our decision settle into something that felt like peace rather than panic. My phone buzzed with texts from my parents, alternating between guilt trips and threats, pleas and anger. I turned it face down without reading them all. "Are we really free now?" Lucas asked quietly. I looked at my brave, resilient children and smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. We're really free." That night, lying between Maya and Lucas in Patricia's guest room, I listened to them breathe deeply and peacefully. Tomorrow would bring challenges, moving logistics, paperwork, the reality of starting over. But tonight we were safe, we were valued, and we were finally truly free. The morning sun streamed through the windows of our new house 3 days later, casting golden rectangles across hardwood floors that belonged to us. Maya stood in the doorway of what would become her room, violin case in hand, eyes wide with possibility. "I can practice any time I want?" she asked, as if the concept were too wonderful to believe. "Any time," I confirmed, watching her face light up with joy I hadn't seen in months. "These are your hours, your space, your music." Lucas was already arranging his books on the built-in shelves in his room, organizing them by subject with the methodical precision he'd inherited from his father. "Mom, look. I can spread out my science experiments on this whole desk, and nobody will make me clean them up for baby equipment." The house was modest, a 1950s ranch with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen that opened into a living room where natural light poured through large windows. But it was ours. Every decision about furniture placement, wall colors, and household rules belonged to us. That first week brought a parade of small revelations. Maya practiced violin for 2 hours straight without anyone shushing her. Lucas read aloud from his astronomy book without whispered reminders about quiet time. I cooked dinner while they did homework at the kitchen table, their papers and projects spread across the entire surface without apology. "This feels like a real home," Maya said one evening as we ate takeout pizza on the living room floor, still surrounded by unpacked boxes. "What makes it feel real?" I asked, curious about her 8-year-old perspective on our dramatic life change. "Nobody's angry at us for existing," she replied with startling clarity. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "And we can laugh as loud as we want." Their observations hit deeper than they knew. In our old temporary arrangement, we had indeed been constantly apologizing for existing, for making noise, taking up space, having needs that conflicted with other priorities. The following Monday, I returned to work with an energy my colleagues immediately noticed. Patricia pulled me aside during our lunch break, studying my face with professional assessment. "You look different," she observed. "Lighter somehow." "I feel different. Like I can breathe properly for the first time in months." My productivity at work increased dramatically without the constant underlying stress of navigating family politics at home. Dr. Martinez, the emergency department director, called me into his office 3 weeks after our move. "Isabella, I've been watching your performance lately, and I'm impressed with your leadership during crisis situations. How would you feel about taking on more supervisory responsibilities?" The promotion to head nurse came with a substantial salary increase and regular daytime hours that would allow me to attend Maya's concerts and Lucas's academic competitions. For the first time since my divorce, I felt professionally valued rather than just functionally useful. Meanwhile, news from my parents' house filtered through family, friends, and social media posts that told interesting stories between the lines. Dorothy's Facebook updates about helping with baby Oliver became increasingly frequent, often posted at odd hours suggesting sleep deprivation. Her formerly pristine house appeared cluttered in background photos, with baby equipment dominating every visible surface. Patricia shared gossip from her book club, where Dorothy occasionally appeared looking frazzled and overwhelmed. She mentioned that taking care of Oliver full-time is more challenging than she remembered from her own children, Patricia reported with carefully neutral expression. Through my cousin Jennifer, I learned that Ryan and Natalie's relationship was experiencing significant strain. The renovation project had stretched far beyond the original timeline, with mysterious delays and cost overruns that suggested financial difficulties. Jennifer mentioned seeing them at couples counseling sessions at the community center. Apparently, they're struggling with the transition to parenthood without the support system they expected, Jennifer said carefully, clearly trying to avoid taking sides in family drama. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ryan and Natalie had assumed my parents would provide unlimited childcare and household support while they maintained their careers and social lives. Without my practical contributions to the household management, Dorothy and Frank were discovering the reality of caring for an active baby while maintaining their own routines. 6 months after our escape, I received an unexpected text from Frank. "Would you be willing to meet for coffee? I'd like to discuss some things." We met at a neutral cafe downtown where Frank looked older and more tired than I remembered. He ordered coffee with hands that shook slightly, whether from age or stress I couldn't determine. "I owe you an apology," he began without preamble. "Your mother and I handled the situation poorly. We let favoritism cloud our judgment about what was fair to you and the children." His admission was gratifying, though it came too late to change our circumstances. "What made you realize that?" He sighed heavily. "Living with Ryan and Natalie full-time showed us how much work you were doing that we took for granted. The cooking, cleaning, organizing, emergency childcare when needed. We assumed it was natural for you to handle everything because you're so competent. And because I was the one who needed help," I added quietly. "Yes. We confused needing temporary housing with being helpless or incompetent. We were wrong." He paused, stirring his coffee unnecessarily. "Dorothy misses the children terribly. She asks about them constantly." "They miss their grandparents too," I replied honestly. "But they also remember how it felt to be treated as less important than their cousin. Would you consider allowing supervised visits? Maybe at a park or restaurant where everyone feels comfortable." I considered his request carefully. Maya and Lucas had asked about their grandparents, though without the desperate longing I might have expected. They seemed more curious about Dorothy and Frank's well-being than eager for reconciliation. "I'll discuss it with Maya and Lucas. Any relationship going forward happens on their terms, not adult expectations." 8 months after leaving my parents' house, I signed mortgage papers for a small 3-bedroom home with a blue front door and a backyard perfect for Lucas's outdoor science experiments. The closing process was surreal. Sitting in a law office, signing documents that made me a homeowner at 34, single and successful and completely independent. Maya and Lucas stood in our new kitchen that first evening, marveling at the space and light. "We really own this whole house?" Lucas asked, running his hands along granite countertops that showed no water damage or mold. "We really do. And nobody can make us leave or change the rules or tell us we don't deserve to be here." That night, as I tucked them into beds and rooms they decorated with their own choices, Maya asked the question that had been building for months. "Mom, are you proud of us for being brave when we left Grandma and Grandpa's house?" I sat on the edge of her bed, overwhelmed by the maturity and insight of my 8-year-old daughter. "I'm proud of us for recognizing that we deserved better treatment and having the courage to insist on it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you're worth." Lucas called from his room. "And sometimes you have to pack your bags and build your own life." Their laughter filled our house, loud, joyful, unapologetic laughter that nobody would ever again ask them to quiet for someone else's comfort. We had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that family isn't about blood relations or obligation, but about mutual respect, consistent love, and the choice to value each person for who they truly are. Our sweet independence had become the foundation for something even better, a life built on dignity, respect, and the unshakable knowledge that we were worthy of love without conditions. If this story of ultimate independence had you rooting for Isabella, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Isabella calmly told her children to pack your bags, while her family stood there stunned. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more inspiring stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.